So in this video we're going to be tactically breaking down how to set up a 4-4-2 both in and out of possession. So to start off with, just naturally the 4-4-2 gives you more attackers in advanced central positions, but this also means that in order for the system to work stylistically, you don't really want a front two consisting of two forwards who are both poacher-like strikers, just as Erling Haaland is, who want to hold advanced positions and provide runs in behind. You need one of the front two to be able to drop off and link the attack. And this is where a striker like Lautaro Martinez could be used, another player who we do have an analysis video on, which will be linked below. Now in possession, the 4-4-2 can look more like a 2-4-4 at times, with the wingers pushing high and wide, and because you have one less central midfielder compared to a 4-3-3 for example, it can be harder to work the ball through the centre of the pitch. And so utilising a more direct style of play with the back line looking for longer passes into the striker's feet, chest or head can be a more efficient way of progressing the ball forward. The use of the wide midfielders, however, can vary. If you have natural wingers, they can sit high and wide, but if like Diego Simeone's Atletico Madrid or Unai Emery's Aston Villa, you use wide midfielders who prefer to operate in central positions, they can instead invert into the half spaces between the lines, with the fullbacks then being tasked with pushing higher up the pitch to keep the width in the system. And we can see this set up in this example with Benfica having possession in the build-up phase in their defensive third, and you can see the fullbacks have pushed slightly higher up in line with the midfield double pivot. However, when Benfica work the ball into the middle third, you can see that their front four is a lot narrower than their back four, with the front two obviously holding central positions, but also the wide midfielders in a midfield four pushing up into positions inside of Juventus's fullbacks, sitting in the half space. But we see the benefits of a 4-4-2 system, as with more attacking players in narrow advanced positions, Benfica are able to use a more direct style of play, with a long ball forward in behind the Juventus back line, finding the run of Rafa Silva, who's able to get a shot away inside of the box. From a defensive point of view, in the 4-4-2, the front two need to do their defensive work diligently, to remain close to the midfield double pivot behind them, not just to cut off passing lanes, but also to stop them becoming isolated in the centre, whilst the wide midfielders either side also need to shift over quickly into central positions when the ball is on the opposite flank, in order to stop opposition players finding space wide of the midfield double pivot. And so the wide midfielders on the opposite side to the ball have to essentially become temporary central midfielders to negate this space from opening up. During certain games, if the opposition has a deeper line midfielder that is controlling possession, you can also instruct one of your front two to drop slightly deeper and give you a 4-4-1-1 defensive shape as well when needed. However, when defending in the middle third, despite the 4-4-2 being excellent at compacting the centre of the pitch due to the wide midfielders' narrow positioning, this will leave more space on the flanks than with a 4-5-1 or a 5 at the back system, and so you have to be wary of switches of play. Though if you do have fullbacks who are capable of defending in 1v1, such as Wan-Bissaka or Kyle Walker, this can negate this threat. However, in order to negate this potential threat on the flanks, the wide midfielders can also be instructed to perform a more disciplined defensive role than they otherwise would in a 4-3-3 for example. Just because the initial defensive setup is in a 4-4-2 doesn't mean that it has to always look like this, particularly when the opposition's fullbacks look to push forward up the pitch. Here we see this in full effect, as initially when the ball is in the middle third, Arteta's Arsenal was set up in a very horizontally and vertically compact 4-4-2 shape, but as Manchester City shift the ball from one side to the other, because Josko Guardiola, the City left back, has pushed high up the flank, in order to stop him being able to take advantage of that space vacated on Arsenal's right due to their narrow back line, Bukayo Saka, Arsenal's right-sided midfielder, has to drop into the defensive line temporarily, giving Arsenal a 5-3-2 defensive shape in this phase of play. And so it's important to remember that whilst you may use a certain formation on paper, if the opposition do look to rotate positions and push players forward from deep, particularly the fullbacks, you do need your wide players to have the defensive discipline to know when they need to drop off into a deeper position in order to stop the opposition creating overloads or having a free man in space on the flanks. Now the reason we have seen the 4-4-2 making a return to the modern game is because when it comes to pressing aggressively high up the pitch, which the majority of elite sides want to do, the 4-4-2 defensive shape allows you to cover a greater width than with a 4-3-3 for example, with the wide midfielders capable of sitting narrow, ready to press the fullbacks if the ball is switched out to them, while still giving you 4 players in the centre of the pitch in that box shape. The front 2 can work together to cut the passing lanes into the opposition's deeper lying midfielder on the edge of the box, while simultaneously applying pressure to the goalkeeper and centre backs, whilst your midfield double pivot can push high up and man-to-man press the opposition's central midfielders, while still affording you a spare man at the back in a 4v3 situation. However, the disadvantages of using a 4-4-2 defensive shape is that if the opposition opt to use a number 10 sitting in behind your midfield double pivot, if your 2 central midfielders get stretched apart whilst pressing the opposition's double pivot, this can open up a passing lane directly between them, allowing the opposition to then progress the ball through your press in behind your midfield. And so the solution to this is to decrease the width in your midfield line and have your wide midfielders come across to pick up an opposition central midfielder when necessary, allowing one of your central midfielders to then sit closer to the other and stop that passing lane from opening up. And so all in all, whilst a 4-4-2, 4-4-1-1, whatever you want to call it, is definitely more of an old school system used more in the 90s and 2000s, it's definitely making a comeback, mainly because it's an incredibly good defensive shape if organised properly, but also because when coming up against aggressive pressing sides, it allows you to use a more direct route in order to progress the ball forward. And of course it allows you to get 2 goal scoring centre forwards on the pitch. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed that video, check out some of our others. They will be linked in the description below.